Hello, everyone, and welcome to this month's Seekers Session. I hope you're having a great weekend. Or for those of you in the United States, happy Labor Day weekend. And let's say hi to Jay Cobley. How are you, Jay?
Hello, Mark. Doing really well. Thank you.
Good. Nice to see you. So this month, we are looking at the topic of adversity and how it is that, as Ralph Waldo Emerson put it, when it is dark enough, you can see the stars. In fact, there is a sacred relationship between darkness and light, shadow and illumination that's well understood among wisdom traditions. In shamanism, the oldest wisdom path on the planet, initiation through adversity is understood to be a necessary step toward spiritual maturity. Shamanic cultures use rituals of immersion into darkness, pain, deprivation, and fear as springboards to illumination and self-knowledge. Traditional rites of passage are meant to symbolize the passage from innocence to experience, from naivete to the beginnings of wisdom. They mirror the stages of the human condition, you could say, moving through life's inevitable pains and losses and the thousand shocks that flesh is heir to. Initiation rituals take many forms, from doing walkabouts in the wilderness to sensory deprivation and journeys with plant teachers. But they all share three common phases. Those phases are separation, liminality, and incorporation. These three steps of the initiation process provide a useful model for how we can think about awakening through adversity in our lives. The first phase, separation, points to the experience of being pulled out of your comfort zone when something challenging happens. Now, most of you are familiar with this experience: losing a job, dissolving a marriage, receiving a difficult diagnosis, being displaced from a home, or experiencing serious oppression of any kind. They all serve the same purpose of stripping away one's sense of security and separating you from your familiar context. This displacement pulls you out of your familiar emotional world and plunges you into a kind of unknown zone or place. This leads to the second phase of initiation through darkness, which is liminality. Liminal times are often hard. There's a sense of being lost, uprooted, deprived of your moorings, and unable to find solid ground. This can lead to a feeling of wandering or being abandoned or wading through some dark night of the soul. Liminal phases have their own timetable, and they cannot be rushed or predicted. Grief is one familiar door to liminality. As anyone who has grieved a serious loss knows, the process is gradual and it is mysterious. It proceeds in its own way for its own reasons. The liminal phase is never linear, and it frequently brings surprises, some of them wanted and many of them not. Liminality is a kind of soil turning, of sifting through dark earth to reveal the rocks and roots and worms and waste, the contents of consciousness that are often hidden from us in happier times. As we turn the soil of our minds and hearts, we're able to observe what's there and to deepen understanding and insight. The COVID pandemic was just such a liminal time for millions of people. Separated from normal life, we found ourselves in a kind of waiting zone, uncertain, scared, angry, confronted by the elements of our existence that we were able to ignore in happier times. The bad job, the unhappy relationship, the unhealthy habits, expectations, dynamics stood out in glaring relief against the darkness of our lockdown lives. This was painful, but it was also fruitful for many of us, prompting long overdue insights and changes that wound up standing us in very good stead. The final phase of initiation is incorporation. Incorporation is about integrating what has been learned during the rite of passage, how to bring this wisdom into life moving forward. For example, a student of mine who's been a therapist for many years has been burning out in her private practice. When COVID hit, she was shocked to realize how exhausted she really was. And although she continued to see many of her patients on Zoom, others fell away. This left her with mixed feelings. On the one hand, she was happy for the free time. And on the other, she felt the loss of these patients and the scariness of the free time, the empty space they left behind. Over time, she decided to change the nature of her practice, to radically reduce her office hours, to do more group work, and to experiment with new approaches to therapy that appealed to her changing interests. As she's progressed in the incorporation phase, she's aware of how much better it suits her at this stage of life, preserving the love that she still feels for her work while integrating the insights that she's gained during lockdown. In dark times, new faculties are born in us. As Theodore Retke, the poet, wrote, "In a dark time, the eye begins to see." In fact, we develop a new kind of seeing, a more receptive, lunar way of seeing, as opposed to our usual solar style, which is more outwards based. Looking inward, which darkness allows us to do, we begin to perceive truths, subtleties, contradictions, and ironies about ourselves that open our eyes to the world as well. We gain a new appreciation for others' suffering, too. It lowers our guards. It brings us closer in times of adversity than we may allow ourselves to be when we're not facing hard times. In fact, love is what we come to perceive when our hearts are broken and others show tenderness toward us or surprise us with their generosity. That is the light that we see in the dark. It's the glow of other people's hearts. In better times, we tend to take one another so much for granted. We pose as if we're self-contained and independent, when in truth, we couldn't survive for 60 seconds without the support and permission of those around us. To say nothing of the natural world, without whose vitality we couldn't exist at all. Feeling pain awakens us by reminding us of our indelible connection. And that's why Stanley Kunitz famously wrote in a poem, quote, "The heart breaks and lives by breaking." Kunitz wasn't recommending a masochistic path of self-punishment, seeking out heartbreak wherever we can find it, but rather acknowledging that it is through breaking, destruction, loss, and stripping away that the important truths of life are revealed. As Ralph Waldo Emerson wrote, quote, "He has seen but half the universe who has never been shown the house of pain." Emerson went on to say that bad times have a scientific value that the good learner would not miss. So why are bad times scientific? Because they break down life and they show you what it's made of. You see new possibilities through the cracks. You're also strengthened by the reminder that all things are impermanent and that you're wiser to be grateful for your precious life with all of its losses and all of its faults than to cling to ideas of past perfection. As I've said many times, whatever awakens you is grace. And sometimes that grace is savage. And that shows you how perverse life can be sometimes, concealing the most important, even blissful gifts in excruciating packages. Emerson learned this following the death of his wife from tuberculosis when she was only 19. Ellen Tucker was the love of Emerson's life, and he nursed her through 18 months of consumptive hell. And then after she died, fell into a profound depression. For close to a year, Emerson was largely paralyzed by grief. He had had tuberculosis himself as a boy and was terrified of getting ill. Unable to pull himself out of his darkness, he decided to do a shocking thing. He went to the cemetery and he opens Ellen's tomb. He realized that nothing short of staring into his greatest fear would shock him out of his depression. And in fact, the tactic worked. Within a year of opening Ellen's tomb, an experience that Emerson never described in detail, he had quit the ministry, set sail for Europe, and begun his career as a writer. He vowed thereafter not to miss the, quote, epiphanies of every blessed day, unquote. And he carried this optimism with him until the day he died. His heart had lived by breaking, and what poured out were gratitude, wonder, acceptance, and a sense of being blessed. No element of our experience is more paradoxical than this link between pain and awakening. The binary either or, black or white mind wants to reject this as rationalization or justification or some whitewashing of pain in the colors of wisdom. But this is simply false, as most of us know who've lived this paradox firsthand. When people ask, why can't we be awakened by joy in the same way we're awakened by pain? There is no simple answer. Brain science tells us that negative experiences impact us in ways that positive experiences do not. Negative experiences are often more memorable and catalyzing and challenging, even enlivening in the sense of getting our attention than positive or neutral experiences. As Emerson put it, quote, whilst he sits on a cushion of advantages, he goes to sleep. When he is pushed, tormented, defeated, he has the chance to learn something. Isn't that great? Whilst he sits on the cushion of advantages, one goes to sleep. But when he or she is pushed, tormented, defeated, he or she has the chance to learn something. That's because pain calls for mindfulness and change, while pleasure calls for very little except tuning out and wanting more of the same. Crisis shapes up the status quo, as most of you know. Hardship is part of the human inheritance that we've been prepared to shoulder. The more we overcome our resistance to negative experience, the less painful it becomes. The poet William Blake put it this way, quote, the furnaces of affliction suddenly become fountains of living water, all springing from humanity. Isn't that gorgeous? The furnaces of affliction suddenly become fountains of living water, all springing from humanity. This cannot happen when we're fighting the darkness or turning it into a cross to bear. Self-pity is the enemy of illumination. The Sufis advise us to, quote, overcome any bitterness that may have come because you were not up to the magnitude of the pain that was entrusted to you. Like the mother of the world who carries the pain of the world in her heart, each of us is part of her heart and is therefore endowed with a certain measure of cosmic pain. You are sharing in the totality of that pain. You are called upon to meet it in joy instead of self-pity, unquote. So let's reflect on that idea for just a moment. How is it possible to meet the pains of our lives with joy instead of self-pity? It sounds far-fetched or Pollyanna, but actually it's not. When the foundation of your experience is gratitude, simple gratitude for being here, even when it's hard, a foundational blessing of your human life, there's a kind of joy that arises in you that isn't conditional. It's not jumping up and down joy. It's quiet, amazed, grateful joy, a smile at your core. That's the light that we are able to find in the dark when we've gone through the liminal phase and wish to integrate the good things that we've found in painful times. Many of us who have survived terrible things want more than anything not to lose the insights that we found in the dark. Our great fear is not to waste the pain that we have lived through. I remember this experience vividly from my own life when I came through a life and death crisis. More than anything, I didn't want my life to just go back to what it had been before crisis forced me out of my danger zone and put me into a 10-year liminal period that became my own dark night of the soul. The thought of returning to how I had lived before felt like adding insult to injury. As the novelist Dostoevsky put it, quote, there is only one thing that I dread, not to be worthy of my sufferings. To be worthy of your sufferings means committing yourself to the retrieval of the gold of insight from the dark cave of all that you've lost. As seekers, most of us share an intense desire to grow from the adversity that life gives us, to transform our suffering through wisdom. The question is how? How do we do that? And this month, we're going to be exploring that question by looking very carefully at this relationship between pain, loss, emptiness, and self-renewal. Whether you're going through a hard time right now or you're enjoying a period of relative peace and calm, this inquiry will be of use to you. The next time your life fluctuates, you'll find yourself outside your comfort zone. You can call on these lessons to help you through, to remind you of how light exists in the darkness. And so now we're going to do a 20-minute writing exercise. Jay, could you just pull up that prompt, please? Here we go. I'd like you to take 20 minutes now, please, to write about an adversity in your life today and what you would like to learn from it. An adversity in your life of any kind and what you would like to learn from it. Okay, be as specific as you can be, please. 10 minutes in, Jay will open up the breakout rooms if you would like to connect with other members. Other than that, just keep on writing. 20 minutes.